This is the Leica M60, and it's probably the most ridiculous digital camera that Leica has ever made. Now, before I bash it, let me give you a bit of a background overview of this camera. It was produced in 2014 to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Leica M camera, which was the Leica M3. The Leica M60 is based off the Leica M Type 240, and it features a 24 megapixel CMOS sensor. Now, what's special about this camera is that there are only 600 copies of this camera, and it is beautifully designed by the automobile giants Audi. Now, it comes in a very, very beautiful box, and it comes with a dedicated 35mm Summilux 1.4. Do note that this is not the original lens that comes with it, which shares a similar build and construction in a stainless steel. Not to mention, it comes with, in Leica fashion, fancy Leica gloves and a leather case. When this camera was announced, along with the lens, it cost $16,000. Now, I think what makes this camera stand out apart from its counterparts is that it doesn't have an LCD screen. Now, before we talk about what this camera is, let's talk about what this camera is not. It's 24 megapixels, which is not a lot in modern day standards. It doesn't have the ability to video record. There's no autofocus. There's no white balance adjustment, metering, exposure compensation, and there's no LCD screen. Heck, I even had to flip through the manual to realize what this button does. Now, this camera doesn't even have side lugs. Maybe this is more of a design aesthetics because indeed it is a very beautiful block of stainless steel. Now, with $16,000, you could buy multiple sets of cameras and lenses and still have a lot of money left over for the holidays. But that being said, Leica has never been shy to boast their premium price tags. Now, what this camera does have is a shutter speed dial, ISO, a beautiful ISO wheel, an on and off switch, and a dedicated functional button to let you toggle through some basic settings or displays such as the date and the time, as well as the battery life, as well as the image counter. Now, before I go on to talk about this camera, I must say it's one of the most beautiful and breathtaking cameras that I have held in my hands. The finishing and the aesthetics of this camera is second to none, and I might say I think it's actually even more beautiful than the two black paint cameras in my hands. But when I look at the camera, it just doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, why would someone pay more for less? I mean, no camera brand has ever taken on that sales philosophy. I mean, imagine if Canon released a new camera and told you they stripped back on some functions. I mean, can you imagine the outroar that it would cause? Do you know? So, I really didn't understand this camera, and rest assured, I didn't buy this camera. I've actually loaned this camera to just to take a look at it and see how it would feel to shoot it on a day-to-day basis. And once again, shout out to Billy for lending this camera for a couple of days. Now, I think until I tried it for the first time, I must say that that experience was very liberating. I took this camera out and I found myself roaming down the streets, paying attention to my surroundings, composing my photos, taking my time to be in the moment. I guess the closest sort of experience that I can relate is like shooting film. Now, when I was taking photos, I didn't find myself chimping at the photos because, again, it was impossible. And what I realized this camera brought to me was that it boiled down photography to its core. It was just you and the camera. After all, that's what photography is all about, right? It's a composition of light, your ISO, the aperture, the shutter speed, and you. And for those brief moments of shooting with this camera, it suddenly made photography fun again. And I actually haven't even had a chance to take a look at the photos that I shot, which I will feature here. But I must say that it made me a lot more aware of my surroundings. And just being in that moment and realizing what was going on around you, seeing what was in and out of the frame, was truly a unique experience. And I think probably shooting film would be the closest comparison, but you don't have the caveats of film, such as the cost of film, or having to develop the film photos, or risk having light leaks, for example. So, this was a surprisingly bold move by Leica, but after shooting it for a day, I kind of see why it works. Now, who's this camera for? Now, I wouldn't recommend it if it was your first Leica, because I think you need to probably need to try a normal Leica to see whether or not the rangefinder experience is really for you. And if you've tried it and you think it works, then I do think that this is a very good alternative if you really want to strip photography down to its roots. This camera is basically for the purist who enjoys photography as a tool and as an art to capture the moment and at the same time to not be too hung up uh, in the settings and scrolling through complicated menus. Now, who is this camera not for? I would say if you're a professional and you need to submit photos, then I clearly don't think that this is a very wise choice. But if it was a hobby and if and you could afford to pay $16,000 for this camera, I think you would really enjoy the experience. Now I know there are alternatives in the market. For example, the newest screenless Leica M would probably be the Leica M10D. But even though it's a more modern camera, I can think of several reasons why some people may prefer this camera. Um, the buttons and the layout on this camera make more sense. For the M10D, the on and off button as well as the exposure compensation was actually on the ISO dial. So I like the layout of this camera more. And I find that turning on the camera and off over here, it's faster, more accessible. Especially with shooting street photography, you want it to feel, you know, easy to access on the hands. There are several upgrades which the Leica M10 offers, but I don't think it really makes sense because it kind of defeats the purpose of getting a camera without a screen. For example, that camera has a Wi-Fi function, so you can preview the photos on your phone and has live view, and you can also use the VisoFlex. But if those are the functions that you want, then just get a normal Leica M10P. Another thing is that the battery life on the M240 is better as well. And some people actually appreciate the heftier and thicker profile of this camera. There's also, for example, the M262, which I would say is the normal version of this camera. But if you're looking for something a little bit more special, a little bit more premium, then this is definitely one alternative to consider. Now, the M262 does have a premium edition as well, but it comes in red. So that's something that really shouts Leica. And so it kind of also defeats the purpose of having this camera. Now, if you're not into the whole Leica philosophy, then this camera really doesn't make sense at all. But do remember that people who shoot Leica are a slightly different um, breed of people. These are people who are paying for less. And as someone who's transitioned from mirrorless DSLRs to mirrorless photography into Leica photographer today, I can sort of appreciate that transition. And although it doesn't make sense from really a financial point of view, but I think it works for me because it makes photography fun again. And I think that's the most important thing is that you want to enjoy the experience. I think the photographic experience itself is as important as the photos because I know today nowadays it's easy to get judged or easy to obtain your satisfaction from the amount of likes you may have on social media or whatever. But remember that photography is for yourself. And so if you enjoy that experience, then as long as you're able to afford that price tag, then I think it works for you. So once again, shout out to Billy for lending me this camera. I'm looking forward to taking a few more photos with it. But once again, I am impressed by this camera. And what do you guys think? Does anyone of you own this camera or something similar? Let us know down in the comments below. And for more videos, don't forget to click the subscribe button. And Happy New Year to all of our subscribers and to all the new viewers. I'm looking forward to sharing more things with you in the year to come. Till next time.